Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. I'm Aldo Mazza, percussionist and drummer and artistic director of Cosa Music, inviting you to join me in conversations with friends, artists, and specialists in our music community. Today, I have the great pleasure of having one of my favorite people, Micheal player. Great marimba player, a teacher at Eastman School of Music, also the president of the Percussive Art Society, our international brotherhood and organization. Micheal, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure. I know you're on a little bit of a vacation. It's summertime, but on the theme of shaping your journey, I want to have the conversation of you are now, well known not only as a teacher at Eastman School of Music, which is a great school. And by the way, I went there one summer and studied.
Nice.
Yes, and studied with John Beck.
Summer's the best time to come.
I did. So I had some lessons with John Beck, the great teacher, and also was there for the jazz program. I always kind of treaded both sides.
Yeah.
And you are well known as a great marimba player, teacher, and all of that. But walk us through from the beginning in shaping your journey. Start from the beginning as long as you remember. Something
as long as I remember. Well, what do I remember? My journey, I think best to start by saying that, I grew up in a household where there was a lot of music, so my father was a music educator, band director in the upstate New York area, not far from here in Syracuse, New York. So I grew up outside Syracuse. And he was very, very well known, became even more well known as an educator, band director, actually nationally. So I would, even when I was younger in my profession, people, when I would travel, even as far as the West Coast, they'd ask me about my father, which was kind of great. But so I kind of grew up in a house where there was a lot of music from him, going to his concerts, all different kinds of music from, everything from the marching band to the jazz groups to the wind ensembles and orchestra stuff. Both my parents, when I was really young, played in the Syracuse Symphony. My mom's a clarinetist. She taught private clarinet in the house. So, I walked through the house hearing the Mozart clarinet concerto all the time, or the Webern variations, and we had a lot of great music being played all the time. On the stereo, it was like everything from Copland and Beethoven to the Carpenters and Chicago and Blood, Sweat and Tears, and you name it, it was cool. Dave Brubeck. So, I guess I was lucky to have that kind of potpourri of musical genres coming at me. And also just being immersed in watching my father's teaching and just watching his bands and all the things that he did and really getting excited about that. So that was great. It was in my ears. And in terms of percussion, I don't really know why I decided on percussion. My mother told me that when I was younger, I wanted to be a tuba player. I can't even imagine, I'm only 5'7" with the hair, so with tuba would be like, but anyways, I think I fell in love with probably the percussion section of my father's band, so I started learning by ear a bunch of snare drum stuff when I was a kid. I would memorize probably like from the time I was 7 or 8, in my own way, I would be able to memorize the whole marching band show and be able to play it on a table or something, and I'm sure I had my own, raw version of what that was, but I did that and then just jumped into it and started taking lessons when I was young, private lessons and went through the program that they established in the high school I was at. Was very good. Still is a great music program. It's West Genesee High School in Syracuse. And we had everything, you played in the wind ensemble, you played in the orchestra. I played Beethoven 1 in high school. The wind ensemble was great. We had guest conductors in like Donald Huntsberger from Eastman or Warren Benson, who was a composer then, playing great pieces, even pieces by Karel Husa, the Pulitzer Prize winning composer, music for Prague when I was in high school, and things that at the time when you're, at those ages, you don't really appreciate that because that's what you know. Right. And as I've gotten older, it didn't take me long, but certainly as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate it more and grateful that I had all that, when I was in high school, one fun story, when I was a freshman in high school, so I was a ninth grader, I was playing the small bass drum in our drum line. And this is November of 1976. So the first PASIC was at Eastman in 1976 in November. And Fred Sanford was asked to do a clinic. The great marching, Fred Sanford, the DCI Percussion Award is named after Fred Sanford. He's fantastic percussion arranger and educator. He came and used our drum line from our high school as his clinic drum line. So we rehearsed with him one day, and then we all went to Rochester the next day. And, I didn't know, I'd never been to Eastman before, and I didn't really understand what PASIC was or Percussive Art Society or anything. But here I was, 14-year-old, went to Eastman and stood on the Eastman Theater stage with a little bass drum in 1976 at the first PASIC, which was, it's in a way, it's a bizarre or unbelievable coming together of things in that moment that I had no idea of. Now that's where I am. How many concerts I've played on the Eastman Theater stage, and now being involved with PAS as well. So it's kind of neat in that way. So that's how it started. Then I went to school. I can keep going, or should we pause for air?
Well, I wanted to ask you though, this is something really interesting that I, as I have conversations with some of our friends, it just seems from Vic Firth to John Beck, myself. I mean, anybody that I remember, apart from Gary Burton, most of us were drummers first, and then some of us gravitated to timpani or gravitated to mallets, as you have, as a main focus. Others of myself, I've blurred the lines. It's like I could never really make up my mind, I tell people. So I just did it all. It was crazy. But it's interesting to notice that the drumming was the first, and then of course then we channel those energies and those interests where we go. Even Glenn Velez was a drummer, and then he gravitated to frame drumming and took that to a whole other level. So what was that point in your journey that made that difference? And tipping, was it a person? Was it an event?
Tipping from drums to keyboard instruments?
Yes.
Well, I don't think I ever left drums, even though it can seem like it, but I understand what you're asking me. I played keyboard stuff in high school, junior high. My dad was the band director, so he said, you have to learn to play keyboards. I did it begrudgingly, and did it. Usually I did, like once a year I would learn a new keyboard solo for contest or things like that. So I came out of high school playing like some Bach, like the Bach A minor concerto 2 mallet thing on marimba, and I played Yellow After the Rain, Right. But there's 2 interesting stories for me that are probably be interesting to people watching, or if anyone does watch this. One is that the bigger part of the story is that when I went to college, I first went to Ithaca College for 2 years. Okay. And then later transferred to Eastman as a junior, but I started at Ithaca, and my first year, fall of 1980, was Gordon Stout's first year. And I had actually met Gordon a couple of years before that, because he came and played the Hovannes Concerto with our high school orchestra. So I knew him because our conductor of the orchestra had met Gordon at the New England Music Camp. And Gordon came and I met him, and it was kind of fun. I mean, he didn't integrate that much, but I played the percussion section and we watched him. So when he went to Ithaca, it seemed like the right choice to go to Ithaca. So I went to Ithaca, and that got me excited about the marimba. I wasn't excited about it before that, really. I was, I did it because I had to. I thought the 4 mallet thing was interesting, but it wasn't my main focus. Drum set was, Yeah,
and Gordon also, just to interject, I mean, when he wrote his Mexican dances, I think that was a game changer for most people, because all of a sudden people took notice.
And that happened when I was in. That happened actually, ironically. Him and Lee played that concert at the 76 PASIC. Now, I didn't go to that concert because I was so young. We just in and out, But that happened that same time when I was at Eastman with my high school drum line in 76. But so by 80, more people are playing the dances. But, I think his paradigm of a performer composer was something that was really intriguing, inspiring to me. Served as a great paradigm. And I think I loved the laboratory of higher education, watching him teaching, going out and performing, coming back, bringing those experiences back to the students, the percussion ensemble medium.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a big paradigm. And then before that, though, interestingly enough, I saw a Lee Howard Stevens clinic when I was a sophomore in high school. So this would be 1977. My father made me go. I didn't want to go. It was in Cortland, New York. And I remember sitting there going, Dad, I'm going to play. I'm not really going to play the marimba that much. I don't go to this. So I go and I sit in the back of this band room in Cortland, New York, kind of like sitting in the back of the band room, like, okay, I'll listen to this for as long, And it's, ironically, that week or right around that time, my teacher, great guy from Syracuse, Herb Flower, was the principal percussionist in the Syracuse Symphony at the time. He assigned me the William Kraft French Suite for contest, multiple percussion solo. For those who don't know it, it's a 4-movement multi-percussion piece, educational type composition written by William Kraft, great musician, timpanist, composer, and based on Baroque instrumental dance suite movements. And so the third movement, called the saraband, you had to use 4 mallets to play the saraband. It had a bunch of drums and cymbals and stuff. So I remember he showed me how to, probably showed me like cross stick grip, which is fine. I don't know what he showed me. It was 1977. I went home. Of course, I didn't practice that day. Maybe a couple of days later, I went downstairs, set it up, kind of tried to figure out what I was going to do. And I'm trying to remember how to hold the mallets. And I'm sure I came up with some bizarre way because I couldn't remember. And in 1977, we didn't have Google or YouTube or anything else, right? So there wasn't like, let me go online and check out how this works, So that weekend was the Stevens clinic, and I went and I sat there kind of in the back like, And then he goes, well, I'm going to show you how to hold my 4 mallet grip. And I thought, well, this is good because I forgot how to hold the 4 mallet grip. I remember this. So I thought, interesting. I had no idea that what he was doing in 77 was really different than what most people were doing then.
Yes.
But he had these little Musser, remember those Musser fiberglass 2-step mallets? He handed out a couple of those to there's maybe 30 of us. We each got a pair, and then we got maybe the first 3 pages of method of movement. And he's walking around showing us how to hold the sticks. And when you're younger, you don't think things are hard. You're like, oh, okay, fine, makes sense. So I went home with the little handout thing from the Musser educational packet things they used to, or the Ludwig educational packets, with Lee's little thing in there from his book, and the class, and sort of remembering what he said. And I was holding Stevens grip. And the first time I used it was playing drums, was playing multiple percussion, right? It wasn't playing Yellow After the Rain or Musser etudes or anything like that. When I took it to my teacher, he's like, what are you doing? At first I thought he was mad. He wasn't. He was just curious. And I didn't realize, really didn't understand that what I was doing was different than what he had showed me, really, But he was like, wow. And man, this is the Stevens thing. Show me what you're doing. So I was then sort of spending time showing him, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. I think this is how it works. And I'm sure it wasn't, there was no question it wasn't textbook. But that's how I got to do it. And so in some ways, I think that experience of playing drums with a 4 mallet, especially with Lee's technique, or that,
It certainly facilitated, certainly
gave me a strength in there and a way to do it. So that was that, So, so then when I went to Eastman, though, later on, when I transferred to Eastman, which was Gordon's suggestion, which was great experience because I fell in love with orchestral music there even more so. Learned a very, from John Beck, how much every sound matters that you make. Learned that time matters, your good sense of time and professionalism and all these things that JB did such a great job of instilling in us. And of course, being in that environment with other really sensational musicians, both in the percussion studio and in the whole school, was inspiring. I grew up when I was a kid. My dad had Eastman Wind Ensemble records in the house. So I grew up listening to those records a lot as a kid, Lincolnshire Posey and the Holst suites and all of that kind of good stuff. So being there in that wind ensemble was super cool as well. And so, it was great. And I stayed there and did both my degrees there, actually.
It's nice. And, it's interesting to backtrack a little bit. My experience when I first met Lee was actually, I went to a Ludwig Percussion Symposium way back, one of those earlier ones. And there was, Gary Burton, Lee Stevens, Carmine Appice, Joe Morello, like everybody, right? And it was at Madison, Wisconsin. And
Mm.
and I was a rock drummer who had just discovered this music, and I was preparing myself for classical for the rest of the world.
Mm.
And I played a little bit of two mallets, and it was actually Gary Burton who showed me how to hold four mallets. So the
Mm.
year following, I went to Micheal, and I was showing everybody their four mallets because everybody was still playing Delecluse with
Yeah.
two mallets and really hard mallets. And it was
Oh, I see. Yeah.
heavy French contemporary, right? And here I arrive. I didn't really play, but I knew how to hold the mallets really well.
Mm.
And so I went from that, from that trajectory. And then Lee, and his whole classical approach, and Joe Morello in the jazz, and that whole experience, which is actually the basis of the whole Coast experience, was
Mhm.
based on that. I said, this is it, but let's take it 10 notches higher. And
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
inspired me to, after that experience, I said, this is the way you learn with all the top masters. And that
Yeah.
changes everything like immediately if you're serious.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that's, yeah. And I'm sure those kinds of things stay with you, in your experience when you were holding the four mallets and playing the drums, which makes a huge difference. And especially his grip, which is, I still play Burton, but his grip really allows for really widespread playing and
Mm.
individual control. So it makes a lot of sense in the contemporary
Yeah.
percussion stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It certainly, it revolutionized what composers could do. And, now you don't think twice. I have students that come in playing it. You have to help them and kind of form them and correct bad habits and do things. But, the things that I would have thought were difficult as an 18-year-old, they don't think are difficult now. It's just like, they're just doing it, So,
Sure. No, there's a lot of things taken for granted that, I remember, and I'm sure you would agree, there was a lot of trailblazing back then, and
mhm.
everything was so new and inventional, for lack of a better word, that everybody clamored. I remember with repercussion, we would go to a PASIC or we would go to something and we'd say, "Oh, did you see that?" And then we would meet William Kraft, and then he'd say,
Yeah.
"Check this music." Or I'd be in an elevator in New York, and Harry Brewer would be standing there. He was working at Carol Music or something.
Yeah.
And I'd
Yeah.
say, I have this group and we're doing a recording. He says, "Oh, check this." So in our first album, we did a piece by Harry Brewer, a piece by William Kraft. And,
Yeah.
we were just out there experimenting and just eating it up because everything was so new.
Yeah.
And it was very formative.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I was probably like, for me, I was in high school when a lot of this was happening. And then when I went to college, it was starting to establish itself more by the time and then when I got into my professional life, the repertoire started to grow and all of that stuff became, as it's become more normal, but, we're still evolving. And I think what's really impressive is the way the repertoire is evolved rather over the last, I've been teaching now 37 years. So, the kind, composers, like Gordon, who wrote for the instrument and Abe's music for marimba in particular, and other people now like Zifiguchi and myself, and maybe Nate Rosario and Eric Samut and you can go on,
Yeah.
right? Are writing that are composers, which is kind of a cool thing. We have our percussionists there, right? But also Pulitzer Prize winning composers are writing for marimba and percussion concertos and things like that, so that was unheard of in the 70s and even the 80s, probably, or early 80s anyways, right? And then eventually, yeah. So, and now more and more of it. And I think it's become, the percussionists become the people they enjoy working with because we're willing to try anything, and
Are you finding that, as the chair of the percussion department at Eastman, and also teaching what you teach, that people are coming to you as specialists, or they're still more general percussion, or is this thought now in thinking of one's personal trajectory? Are they coming to you for one specific thing, to be a mallet player, or to be a percussionist in an orchestra, or just to be a better musician?
I think yes and yes. I think some of them come with a very specific idea. The 18-year-olds, right? Because I'm teaching everything from undergrads, master students, and doctoral students. They're all three of those levels come, but generally with a different sense of what they want to do. But the undergrads, the first year students, some will come with a very, I want to be an orchestral musician. Some, I want to be the next marimba soloist, or some, most don't really know. Some are willing to be open-minded, and I kind of push all of them to be open-minded, and because I really want, the way I like my curriculum to work and the way I believe, most good curriculums work, and whether they be a percussion curriculum or an overall school one, is it's wider and then it gets more narrow, right? So you start by learning a lot about a variety of things, and then you come in, right? And in that coming in period, you're learning, as you start here and go here, you learn about yourself, both what you like and what you're good at. And a lot of times you come in with one idea and then you leave with a different idea, what you want to do, which is kind of cool, right? Some stay the course, The graduate students have a more specific idea typically, right? Which is good, and they should, then you're trying to help them within that paradigm that they've brought to the table, and push them that way. So, and I think too, students that come in as 18-year-olds now to school, have a bigger vision of what percussion is, because we have the internet, right? And they can see all these concerts from videos online, right? And resources for educational things online. And so their view of what's possible is bigger than it's ever been.
And so they're better prepared then, right?
They can be better prepared, and they have a bigger idea, right? And sometimes it pushes them to play music that's too hard, too soon, because they see it, they want to do it. But it's great. It's good that they're informed that way. And sometimes you got to kind of reel them in a little bit and say, we're going to stay the course. We'll get there, But usually what happens with a good studio is that it's sort of a village. It's me, but then it's all the other students sort of taking care of them as they get in there and helping them and kind of learn, the value of kind of going through the process and not running before you can walk well, kind of stuff,
Right,
so,
right. And another thing that I wanted to bring up too is I'm personally impressed with, the repertoire, of course, that's been building in this, nicer repertoire. No, I shouldn't say nicer, more interesting and more expansive repertoire. But also, I've been really impressed by the development and refinement of the instruments, specifically marimba. Vibes too. For a while it felt it was stagnant, and all of a sudden there's been this push recently. I don't know if it's my imagination. Instruments are getting better. People are spending more time developing and improving, so that improves the level of performance, because now we're one is pushing for better music, the other is pushing for a better instrument, and then a better performance. So I think. What I'm seeing, this is maybe my perception. Is it yours as well?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. The marimbas, I'm sure the same is true for you. When I was in school, the low A marimba was what we had. I remember when I was a grad student, I had a class with Keiko Abe in 1984, and I was playing a Maslanka piece on our low A musser, and she came in with her big white. I always tell people I felt like so emasculated. It was like, oh. I'm going to play on this little marimba, but the sound of that and all those things, and that the 5-octave instrument now has become the standard, and now I think we're working our way into slowly sort of a standardized sense of what the bar size will be. Like when I developed, this is my marimba in the back, the Burritt marimba. When I developed that, one thing I wanted Lee to do was let's make the bars. I wanted to bring the bar size in from the Malatex that he had designed prior to that. So let's make the bar sizes so that when you're holding an octave center to center, like on a Marimba 1 or an Adams or a Yamaha, not Keiko's, but the 5100, that size is really the same. And I think, and then making a resonator situation that works still like the old Malatex with these big resonators, because I think that, in my opinion, I like the sound of that. So trying to make those come together so that here's our standard size, maybe now 5, right? And let's make, in terms of octave range, now let's make the actual physicality of that instrument more standard, so that the composers are writing things, it's not more difficult on one instrument than the other, right? And all instruments can have their own personality and sounds, just like any other instruments you would buy, right? But vibraphones, especially recently, have taken a big turn, right? And Marimba One and Malatek are designing new vibes, which are kind of interesting. And
really cool finally, stuff. They're going down to for years we'd be banging, bring it down to at least the E. And I'm seeing instruments
nice to get down
to
the C vibe too, in the Yamaha. Yeah. I love that. I write for that sometimes. I love it. Yeah.
Finally. And it's funny because speaking of Keiko Abe, I remember with your experience with repercussion when we were in Japan, one of our tours, she joined us with her famous piece, the
Marimba Spiritual.
Yeah, Marimba Spiritual. And this is a funny story. We said, we're in Japan, let's invite Keiko to play with us, and she said, I accepted. So we had a rehearsal. It sounds just in the one piece. I thought this would be fantastic if we could do this, and we did. So I was playing the part that starts the rhythm, after all the introduction. So at the rehearsal, right? So I'm saying, I'm looking at her and I'm saying, she's not that young anymore. So I took it down a notch. So I'm going da 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 da, and then she turns around to me and gives me this look, and then she goes like this, and then I'm bringing it up, right, and she keeps going like this, subtly, underneath, and I'm saying to myself, she's gonna kill herself. And she's going up like this, and then the other guys are all looking at me, and we took it like faster than I've ever heard it or played it.
Yeah,
and she just killed it. She was amazing, and then at the end, we were huffing, and she wasn't.
Yeah, she's all over, of course. Yeah,
beautiful. That was a great example of stamina, of somebody who is still there and has been there all along and inspired everybody, right?
Yeah, but the thing with Keiko, she was more interested in in making a moment of expression than she was of holding a tidy box in place. It was like, we're going to go. And I really like that. I love that. I relate to that.
Yeah, and she also said a really interesting thing. She said, you guys played it beautifully, but you don't have to play all the notes that are there. Improvise.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I said, well, of course, that would make sense.
Yeah.
But, we didn't want to mess with it because it's her piece.
Without the respect for what's there. It's hard. And it's a hard Western, I think the Western culture, classical music-wise, is starting to bend out of that now, but it doesn't do that as well. And pieces now written for us, especially percussion concertos, oftentimes now are asking for the percussionist to improvise, right? So, I just premiered a piece was written for me by Joseph Schwantner in March. It was a really, really fun experience. The Eastman commissioned this piece in celebration of the centennial of the school. So it's a piece called Fast Forward. Actually, I have the score. I'm playing on my floor, so right here. Anyways,
Fast Forward. All right.
It's very cool. Yeah, it's really cool. It's really fun. But yeah, here's the beginning of it. You see it looks like that. But so it's a percussion quartet with piano and contrabass plus soloist. So it's kind of a chamber concerto, and I've played his concerto before in Velocities and stuff. So, and I've known his music and him for a while. So it was fun to finally get to premiere a piece by him. But, which was the funnest part in some ways was right at the very end. There's a big cadenza and you improvise. And
beautiful.
You use stuff. And it was a blast, and that's the fun part. And I think percussionists tend to be more comfortable with that than probably most other instrumentalists, right?
Yep.
Unless they happen to be someone who's comfortable with a jazz medium or something, then they've learned that, But and I think it's really cool. I also think it's really important to be able to improvise on the spot in a way that you can use the language of music in a extemporaneous way, So, anyways, it's fun, and I think back about my Keiko experience that day when I told you I played for her, and she made me go back and play the beginning of Variations on Lost Love for her again, and she said, "I'm gonna play with you," and I thought, "Oh, okay." So I started playing this really soft, and she starts going crazy over there, and I stopped and looked at her. She goes, "Keep going." So I'm playing, but at first I was like, "What's going on? What are we doing? What is she doing?" And then it hit me like she's basically trying to get me to play this more in a more improvised way, and that's always stayed with me. It was really cool and very impactful to me. As you know, I was a first year grad student, so I was, I thought I was old, but I was young.
Of course, we know everything at that point, right?
Well, I don't know if I knew everything, but I felt older than
No, we felt like
now I realize I was a kid. So, but
yeah. But I mean, speaking of feeling like a kid, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about it being a musician, being a percussionist. I mean, I still feel like 20 years old, no matter what happens or what,
Yeah.
And I think that's the energy we get from playing this instrument, this music, and being there. It just keeps us alive and interested and interesting also, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, my students give me that energy too. You get with them. And sometimes it's easy to forget, when I first started teaching, I was younger than my grad students. Now I'm older than their parents, which is like, but you tend to forget the difference because I get in it with them and I feel like I'm kind of young at heart. I'm not,
well,
that's just my, yeah, exactly. So that's the fun part. And they help, of course, they keep you motivated, they keep you inspired. They keep you on your toes. And, in a way, I guess, like you're saying, I feel like they keep me young in many ways, even though I can also see them and realize the difference and go, well, I am old, especially when I talk about history, because the things we're talking about, repertoire, instrument innovations, things like that, they take for granted. And I'm not saying that in a way that they're not appreciative of the instruments, but they don't really appreciate it like we would, having sort of lived through it, so.
Yeah. And talking about instruments and inventions, I want to share that, and you'll be the first to hear this, by the way. We had this conversation about the expansion of marimba and all of that. So here's what happened, and I can finally say it, and you'll be the first one.
Okay.
Manhasset is going to be marketing my mallet music stand.
Nice.
And it's going to be, I mean, I've been developing it for years. And finally, during this whole time in lockdown, I had a chance to do these things that I would have never had time to do. So It'll probably, if all goes well, we'll launch it at PASIC, hopefully. And
Nice.
it'll be a major game changer for.
What's it do? Is it hold the mallets a certain way?
No. It's a music stand. That stays on your frame.
For music. It's like you said, it's a percussion music stand or a.
Yes. I mean, there are different variations of it, but the first version is for mallet instruments, so that you don't need individual music stands, whether it's 1, 3, or 4, depending on how large of a piece you have.
Okay.
And then the music just moves with your instrument.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. And
Nice.
this is for me. I said, finally, I can get this out there. It's been, I've had the prototypes done for years, and because I experimented with repercussion, we would do it. I experimented a lot because I've invented a lot of things, but never had the time to patent and take care of that. And finally, I've done it.
Well, it takes time. Yeah.
Yeah, and this one I'm so happy about. I said, okay, now all my friends are going to hate me or love me because the idea of having to move your marimba and then you have 4 music stands, and then you got to move 4 music stands. So you just move your marimba and everything just moves with it.
Oh, nice.
And it's a mobile kind of thing, so it's really easy. It's beautiful, adjustable. I'm so happy finally that this came out. It's coming out, by November. It'll be
nice. Well, congratulations. That's great.
Thank you. And I, once you try it, you can tell me what you think, and I'll get some friends to give some feedback. I'm super excited that it finally happened, and of course one of the best stand companies, Manhasset.
Yeah, I think Manhasset's the best, actually. I like their stands. Yeah. I like the thin traditional Manhasset stands.
Yeah, and they've come up with some really nice things and really good people, and we've been going back and forth, and finally I signed off on it, and I'm excited. You're doing something good for the community, right?
Do they have a booth at PASIC, Manhasset? Are they doing?
I don't think so. This is brand new. I said the best place would be PASIC to launch it, that particular version, because there are several other versions for something else, and they agreed. But I just got back from Europe, and now we'll start that discussion if the production is ready, which I think it will be.
Sure.
Let's see. But it's exciting.
That's great.
Super.
Micheal, I really want to thank you for taking that. We could go on and on for days, and we'll have to catch up in person next time.
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be a
Aldo, thanks for
pleasure.
your time. Thanks for having me on the show, and good luck with everything. And I hope to see, will I see you in Indianapolis? You'll be there?
I am planning on it for sure, unless something bars me from it, and then we may even have a COSA gathering.
Well, come. I'm going to give you 2 plugs. Come to Amadinda on Thursday night. Fantastic concert, and I'm going to be playing with them on one piece. They invited me to solo with them on a piece, and then on Friday morning, you could even sleep in the same room if you want. On Friday morning, the Eastman Percussion Ensemble is playing a concert because we were one of the winners of the international percussion competition. So come see us because we're doing some really cool stuff. So come check it out, man.
No. If all goes well, we'll do a whole a COSA reunion gathering of the community, and we'll get people out to PASIC and celebrate a little bit, getting under from the rubble we've just been coming out of.
Right. Exactly. I think we're getting out, which is good. I'm thankful. So
yes.
Aldo, take care. Nice to talk to you.
You too, and Micheal, to be continued.
Yeah, man. The best of all. Cheers.
Thank you.